Howdy, partners. Welcome to the Howdy Partners podcast, where we give you tactical insights so that you can do your role better. We are going to be talking about the partner-led motion, and our guest today has a story around their company being very successful and almost entirely partner-led. Before we dive into that, though, Tom, how have you been?
Doing pretty well. Might see you next week here in Denver, which is awesome. And if we don't, then I get to see you in under a month at Inbound. So we're finally getting to meet after years of building a relationship, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, me too. That's been bizarre because, I haven't met Ben Wright, our other host, ever in person. So it's cool to meet friends on the internet. And we're joined today with another new friend, Scott. Scott, tell us about yourself and what your background is and where you're at today.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Will. And thanks for having me. So I'm Scott Hanrahan. I lead global partnerships at a Series B startup called Rivery. Rivery is on a mission to be the number one tool for data operations. So basically that means ingesting data from hundreds of sources and transforming it through the data warehousing process, and then activating it by pushing it back to source systems to help the frontline employees actually do their jobs. I joined Rivery about 5 months ago. And before that, I spent 11 and a half years at a data and analytics consultancy called Keyrus. I guess I'll just say as we start here, my experience in both places is mainly in what I'd call strategic technology partnerships, right? So companies like Tableau and Salesforce, AWS and Snowflake and Databricks, right? Kind of the behemoths like that of the industry. And my experience is at small companies, right? Where our primary reason for partnering with those enormous tech vendors is to get leads, like it's a sales motion. So I know there are a lot of different types of partnerships out there. So I just wanted to clarify my experience. And when I talk about partnerships on this call, that's what I'm going to be talking about. But when I was at my last company, at the services company, which by the way, Will, as we talked about before, I think it's really quite similar. The partnership motion at the services company is really quite similar to what your listeners are doing in the B2B SaaS world. I can say that now, having worked on both sides of the fence. But I worked in various roles. So I did delivery actually, and I managed delivery teams, and then I did sales and partnerships and then general management.
Very cool. And so from the experience that you had, you mentioned that the partner-led motion was, critical, working with these giant companies as a lead source. And so at a high level, what does partner-led growth mean to you based on that experience? How would you describe it to someone who doesn't know anything about it?
I think it means that the company acknowledges that partnerships is an effective means of growth, right? And so management is supportive of these cross-departmental motions to go to market with and through partners. And so, the motion exists. I like the word motion because, it exists from the lead generation all the way through the customer lifecycle to post-sale, and it's cross-departmental, and it all adds up to business growth. And I also think that partner-led growth can work alongside of product-led sales or other growth methodologies, because regardless of how the lead actually comes in, right? Maybe it was from a trial that was through the website off the back of a marketing campaign and then onto an SDR cadence and finally went, regardless, right? Companies who practice partner-led growth, they can use that practice to accelerate the sale, right? Or to get through procurement faster. Or they could just use it as a reason to build a deeper relationship with the associated strategic partners, that they're also working with on the account, right? And use that to collaborate on other projects. So I think it's kind of holistic.
It's to me too, it's really easy to visualize and understand how partner referrals work. I mean, it's super simple. Partner refers lead, but tying that back to partner-led growth, I think what's super interesting is the non-referred deals or pipeline coming in and effectively tying a partner to that. You kind of nailed it, Scott. And it's also really hard to pull off, which is, can I get direct buy-in from sales and sales leadership to say, listen, we could bring in partners, whether it's a service-based agency, another tech partner, to help kind of shed light and build some trust for us. It's really easy for me to kind of rope them in. And what they're not going to do is take away sales commissions or the spotlight on the salesperson. I'd love to like understand your experience of how you get that buy-in from sales to understand like, listen, a partner's not coming in to steal your thunder. They're coming in to help you.
So I think to get buy-in from sales and sales leadership, the first thing I would say is that to qualify this, a lot of my experience is not on the partner side. So it's more on, you could say, the sales leadership side. Like at my last company, we didn't have a partner program, or I should say we didn't have a partner department rather. Right. So the partner work was done by me in the sales management or general management capacity. And obviously that means that I haven't had as much experience answering your question, maybe as some other folks. For management, like investing in partnerships, it's not a partnerships decision, it's a business decision. So there has to be a reason. And the reason I'm most familiar with is that, the company wasn't growing in the way that the company would like. And you have to have your ducks in a row to point that out to management. And by the way, as a quick aside, it's kind of easy now. In SaaS companies, all that data is in Salesforce or HubSpot or something, right? And so, by the way, I went and got the reporting badge on Salesforce, so I'm comfortable like doing all of my own analyses, but that's just an aside that I'd encourage others. But anyway, if I just lean into the management narrative of not growing fast enough or having too high of a customer acquisition cost, or some other similar pain point, right? Then, from there, I think it's similar to any other change management situation. Like to make a sales reference, Mike Weinberg, guy that wrote New Sales Simplified, he writes about exposing the wound, opening up the wound, and then it's not done yet in the discovery process. Then you need to pour salt in the wound and make it hurt, right? And from there, sharing the type of manifesto I'd say that that Crossbeam puts out, right, about the partner-led growth, the combination of those two things should resonate. So tying that back to your original question of sales and sales management, I think the pain could be that the seller is not doing as well as their other sellers, right? What is the pain? And by the way, if the seller is crushing it, without partners, maybe that's okay. Find somewhere where we can find success, right? Let's get some champions, and then let's let the other sellers or other sales managers, learn from that champion naturally, right? So you're not imposing something from the side.
Yeah, and Will, it's funny, like you and I have talked about this through and through. Like we can call out 2 or 3 AEs that when we worked at Vidyard just kind of picked up that partner leads are that much more valuable and close that much more faster, and they're this much further along in the sales process. And they're like, you know what? Okay, this works. So it's funny, like just the people that figure this out or like have an aha moment. It's like, I can be way more efficient in my job and honestly crush my goals through partners. And that's not like they're lazy. They're not sitting back and just kind of like letting that flow to them. They're like attacking that and understanding that this is a real valuable motion.
Yeah. And Scott, I really liked what you said about, you're basically selling internally to a business problem, just like you would be selling to a prospect for their business problems where, what is the wounds? What can you do to open the wound to show them, hey, this is actually a pain? And then, pour salt on the wound, which is like, if you don't solve this, this is what's going to keep happening. And I think a lot of partner people, they may not think of it in that way as they're trying to build that business case. They're thinking, I'm hired here, so they're immediately bought in. But in reality, a company knows that they need to do something in this regard. Maybe their advisor says so. Maybe they, saw this in the market and they're making this decision, but they still need buy-in. They still need to understand that this is going to be an effective strategy to continue to lean in. And who knows, maybe it was the CEO's decision and then the VP of sales may not be fully bought into partner led growth. They may need that extra convincing. So I really like how you phrased that, where it's you truly are selling internally to get these other departments on board and actually take action. On the note of like building that internal buy-in, what challenges did you face? Were there attribution conflicts? Were there, resource allocation discrepancies where, you were trying to get something to work, but the team maybe proposed a barrier? If so, how did you navigate that? So what challenges did you experience when going through getting this buy-in and building this motion? And how did you overcome some of those challenges, if there were any?
At my last company, I don't think that we had actually challenges getting buy-in from management, getting buy-in from management um, to start the partner journey because of all of the things that had happened before that, right? So before we were partner led, I was actually leading a technical team doing actual client work. And we had a sales problem, which was that there was no working model for it. This is a new company, right? And so it was a small company, and between me and another senior manager, neither of us actually had sales backgrounds. So we both made the same mistake in a row, actually. We hired consecutively 2 senior salespeople who had great networks and had sold a lot in the past, and it didn't work out. And then we hired a few SDRs. We did marketing events. We started our own meetup group. We just couldn't get much traction, right? So I actually switched roles to try to solve that problem, which was the biggest one at the company. So I started leading a sales team that was at the beginning was just me and one other person. And the process of becoming partner led as a small company without many clients, it was a long one. And it required sticking to what we believed would work for a while before actually seeing results. And I could talk about that, but I'll skip ahead to answer the question. When we became partner led, it became our main lead source quickly, right? So for the reason that it was very clear to everyone that the alternatives were not working, we were able to move in the partner led direction without much friction. But later on, there were some other interesting things I could talk about, right? Because, in time, it did become a sustainable recurring lead source, that was even somewhat macroeconomically stable, and we grew the company profitably about, 6x between, back then in the mid, 2010s and last year. And eventually we were able to bring on a full sales team to support the partner-led growth motion across the US. So a lot of success, but the questions that you're asking, for me, they came a little bit later, which was in a different form. It was in the form of, hey, we only have this so much money and resources and time to invest. Are we sure we should be investing them all in exactly this way in partnerships and even specifically in these partnerships? And, that's a really important question that as management, we need to, we need to have the clear answers for, right? And, as management, it's not like we have all the answers. It's not like we're 100% sure of the things that we're doing. We're just doing the things that we think make the most sense. And so what I did to explain that to the team was I just wrote it down. So I wrote a big, like, short novel, I would say, called Understanding the Company. And I shared the past, right? Because not everyone was at the company in 2015, when it was 2021. And I wrote about the past and about all the things that we had done and about the reasons we had gone in this direction. And furthermore, I shared about what every person in the company, what their role is, to contribute to that, right? So, we talk about marketing. Most people think of it as marketing to clients. Well, we marketed to our partners. For every one pager that we wrote for our clients, we wrote 3 to 4 of those for our partners. And that was supportive of the sales partner motion. In sales, as it's about connecting with all the reps and having partner-led sales be an outbound priority. That's prospecting, right? And then in delivery, it's about delivering that wow quality work, that makes the customers really happy, that the sales and marketing teams can go back and share back with the tech partners. In HR, it's about hiring the people that can make that happen. And it's kind of a big circle. So the challenges were, later for me in the why. In the why are we doing exactly this still, and is this still the best thing, right? And I think that having that framework that I just mentioned, to lean back on, creates a structure upon which we can answer that question, and also kind of a model upon which we can build as more and more data comes in, from other sources. Because even within partnerships, it's not always clear exactly how much effort to spend, on one partner versus another.
I just want to make a comment about like the story, like the company's story. That's so clever, and I never have thought about that before. It's like, for someone who did just come in the last year or two, or just recently, they don't know, so they don't know why, and so giving them that why, I think is a really good like we just talked about before, like a really good sales approach to say, hey, here's what the pain used to be. You don't want to face that pain. We already figured that out. So you as a seller, like, or marketer or whoever, it's not that you got it easy, but like it could be a lot harder, but we're at a state where it's a lot easier because of these things that we implemented. So I really like that. And I also wanted to make a comment about your quote on, for every one pager we made for clients, we made, 3 to 5 for partners. I think that's beautiful. Like that's music to my ears.
It's literally, that's why I'm speechless, because like that is the culmination of what everyone in partnerships is trying to get to, which is partner-led growth, but having that departmental buy-in to say, you know what? Yes, I get it. And I think it ties so nicely to like the company autobiography, for lack of a better term. I love it.
It makes sense in the context of this ecosystem-led growth term and partner-led growth model that we're talking about here, because, if you make one pager for a client, that has a limited distribution and it's often a one-time distribution, right? Whereas, what we did in marketing at my last company was we actually built almost like landing pages, but they were parts of the website that weren't linked to and weren't accessible from anywhere else on the website. And they were specifically for, each strategic technology partner that we had. And it was giving it was treating our partner as our client, right? And having sort of, no ego and lots of hustle around that process. And so we consolidated the right messaging, the right assets, blog posts, use cases, one pagers, et cetera, on that site, broke it down by, region and industry and use case and things like that. So that when people went on that site, when we could refer them there, those one pagers will live forever, right? And people, the reps, if you're doing a strategic tech vendor one pager, the reps don't have to save that anywhere, and then you keep getting recurring use out of this effort.
Amazing. So just to summarize that, like one of the tactical things that the audience can take away from that is like, one, get very focused and lean in and do not a shallow engagement with partners, but go deep. Like you said, you're interweaving, all these web pages and resources together with these strategic partners so that it's not, one, hard to find, and two, it's so ingrained in the partnership as well, where I feel like a lot of partner programs, they have the resource, it lives in somewhere, a drive, a PRM, wherever it is, and then it's so far away from sellers and like the overall marketing program that it's disconnected. It's not in the ecosystem, whereas like you just described, you're actually in the ecosystem and you're incorporating partners in your overall business as well. So I like that.
Right. And you're talking about something that I sort of alluded to but skipped over, which is that, we need offerings, right? And we need offerings that are specific to the person that we're speaking with. It's just like sales, right? That's why these, mass emails, are going out of favor, from SDR cadences, is because they're just not, they're just not specific enough. And it's the same thing if you're selling to, I'm using the word selling in quotes here, right? But selling to, a tech partner salesperson, a strategic partner, right? We need to be sharing with them, why is recommending our product to their other clients, going to be the right thing for their clients. And let's say in the case of a database company, why is it going to increase the database consumption, within that company? Or why is it going to help them land this other company as a new client, right? And so we need to develop what I'll call an offering around that, which consists of the things that you just mentioned. But the one pager is a little bit of a hack. It's like, before you even have the offering, it's like if you talk about it and you follow up with a one pager, all of a sudden that makes something that was before amorphous is suddenly tangible.
Very cool. So let's say I'm thinking through this and I'm like, this is great. Scott's got a great story. I love, what him and his team built. What can I do tactically? Let's say you're back in your previous company and you're just building the partner program. What's the first thing that you do or did or should do? If I'm in that same position where I'm just starting to build this motion, what is that thing? Is it building the company autobiography? It sounds like probably not, because you'd have to wait until you have that motion, a bit better baked. But like, what is that first thing that I should think about and start building?
So yeah, if I'm building this motion in a new company today, or if someone else is, I'm going to go in a different direction here. I think the very first thing that should be done is to have a philosophy, kind of in the same way as companies should really be starting with core values and mission and vision and things like that. I think that in the partnerships area, it's very helpful to have a philosophy so that you can base your decisions and your actions off of it. And my, let's say, three thing philosophy is: first, no ego; second, lots of hustle; and third, adding value. Right? I think if everything we do ties back to one or all of those things. I can share more about them if you'd like. But if that's too pie in the sky, then I think the second step is to establish goals, because everyone wants leads and new business, right? But there's a process around going from starting the partnerships team at a new organization to actually having partners be a stable recurring lead source that I mentioned, like was my experience earlier. So I think there are actually two other goals other than, getting leads that turn into closed deals. And we talked about this a bit earlier with Tom, right? I'd say that in my type of situation, the goal should look something like: number one, speeding up the sales process and increasing the win percentage via taking leads that you already have, like we talked about, and collaborating with your tech partners on them. Secondly, it could be speeding up procurement. So these days, a lot of deals are done through cloud marketplaces, and cloud marketplace deals tend to be faster procurement cycles, right? So think about those. And thirdly is what we talked about, right? Just building the relationships to get exposure. And there are other ways to measure, partnership progress towards getting leads than just getting leads, right? We have a whole thing I could talk about, but we can measure, hey, how many calls are we getting off the back of deal registrations, and how many of those calls are generally positive? How many of them result in managerial meetings afterwards? How many of them result in team meetings? How many of them resulted in just getting a piece of information, from that call that you could use to help your deal close faster? I know all these things are a little less tangible than some managers would like, but those are two things.
No, and I what I'll add to that too is, especially in the startup motion where partnerships is new, and I love that you keep kind of pointing back to this, finding the stability in partnerships. Like, you might not hit stability until year two. So instead of trying to just like pull a number out of your butt and say, like, this is what we want to hit in terms of MRR or ARR, it's, let's keep this a little bit more broad. Like, how can we help speed up the sales process, or like the time to close? And it just makes things a lot more tangible to that, like the idea earlier, versus just getting, distraught or distressed over like, hey, we're not hitting this ARR goal. Well, that's because you just launched partnerships. You have no idea what this ecosystem will be and what it can look like. So instead, why don't we try and attach goals to helping other aspects of the company? Sales process, extending LTV, reducing CAC. Like, how do we fit in with CX and making sure that we have viable patterns to show the organization that partnerships is here to help in any capacity and in several capacities?
So my question around that is, so we said these objectives, we have the general goals, but then we break it down into, what are the pieces of data that influence that? So we should be tracking that. We should be setting up the proper reporting and attribution for it. What is, let's say, one daily practice that you did, or that you think every partner person should do, whether it's looking at a dashboard, whether it's engaging with people internally, whether it is, reaching out to your partner that you haven't reached out to in, 2 weeks or something like that? What is that daily practice that you think everyone should be doing that you feel helped you and your organization be successful through this partner-led motion?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to sound too revolutionary, but I guess that's the nature of the question. I'm going to say preparing for calls, but specifically preparing for calls with the partner. Like, I think that in the partner ecosystem, a lot of people have either previously worked in sales roles, right, or maybe have a dual role where they're doing both sales and partnerships. And it seems like the clients are a whole lot more important and a whole lot more immediate, right? And so when you have a significant sales call, you're always prepping for that with the client, right? In partnerships, it's not necessarily the same. But one thing I did recently was I had a particularly important call in the partner area, and I prepped for like a client call. I thought in advance of all of the questions. It was only a 30-minute call, but there's way more than 30 minutes of material that I needed them to know, right? So I prepped for the call by thinking of all of the questions that I was just guessing that they would ask if it was a 90-minute call. And I just wrote them down in an email and answered them and sent it to them a week in advance. And they were really happy about that, I think, because they used their time well. They could read that email in like 4 minutes, and it could save an hour of conversation because now they already have all this background. You can do that in other ways. So in my weekly partnership calls with partnership leaders and things like that, we come organized. I have a list of stuff we talked about last time, a list of the actions, that I took with the team, a reminder of the goals of our organization with partnerships, and their company overall, right? And I'm ready, I'm prepared with the actions that I think both of us need to take, prepared with the ask, right, for the next week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. So prepare for calls. That's mine.
I love that so much. I actually harp on that a lot. Like I've talked about it where it's like the best thing you can do is make things simple, set expectations, and have clear communication with your partners and really anyone that you're engaging with. And so, it doesn't need to be revolutionary because honestly, not a lot of people do that enough, I would say, for these calls. And I would also venture to say that in your interactions with partners, what I've noticed is there's this diffusion of responsibility. We're partners and it's, I'm not a seller, you're not the prospect. So it's not me taking lead. So it's like, we're both taking lead because we're partners and the power dynamic is a little bit looser. And so the benefit to setting the stage for a call and an agenda and, questions ahead of time, et cetera, that allows you to move the interaction forward where maybe they had a busy day or they're dragging their feet a little bit. You at least are working towards your goal and your company objectives, regardless of how they are in the partnership. And that's not to say that you're just going to, bulldoze the conversation, but you at least bring in this level of seriousness and clarity that they can then take action on and you can take action on. So I actually really love that. And I hope more people prepare for their calls and help the other people that they bring on their calls prepare as well with that clarity. So I love that answer.
Totally. I mean, the overall philosophy that I mentioned is no ego and lots of hustle, right? That's the hustle side, is the prep. The no ego side, you mentioned, it doesn't mean you're bulldozing the call. And frankly, if they come into the call with another agenda, that may be okay. That I'm happy to throw away all my prep, and roll with it if that seems like a higher value, way to take the conversation. And what you mentioned earlier about, who's leading, let's say, I think you were referring to, let's say, a sales rep on sales rep call, right? And who's taking the lead on this call, right? If it's, just between two sales reps about a different partner. And if they're not taking the lead, that's like a huge opportunity for us, right? It's a huge opportunity to come prepared, come with a perspective on the way that we should be, treating that client, right? That's basically your challenger selling the sales rep at the other company, right? Just like you challenger sell a client. Come with a perspective, and they're going to respect that and they're going to want to work with you more.
Amazing. I think that is where we will leave this episode because I think that is where people should now start taking action. If you have calls to get to, depending on when you're listening to this, prepare for them, set an agenda, bring questions, send them ahead of time, and make sure that everyone is clear on what they're going to be talking about. Scott, anything else that you wanted to share with the audience? Any philosophies that you have to wrap up this episode?
No, I think that's it. Thanks a lot, Will, for having me.
Yes, thank you for being on and sharing your wisdom. And thank you, everyone, for listening. That was another episode of the Howdy Partners podcast.